today is all about the loot boxes, which is not only a German-specific topic or issue, it's very relevant across the jurisdictions and countries in Europe. And yeah, very happy to have our referee today, Carsten, who joined our esport team quite recently and has a lot of experience in this field. We are very happy to have you here, Carsten. And as you know, we will record the session, but we will stop the recording once we start the question and answer session. So please feel free to ask questions. You can ask either after the presentation, or you can ask your question in our Teams chat, and we will then present the question as you like. So with this very short introduction, over to you, Carsten.
Thank you, Andreas, and thanks to all for attending. Today we want to answer the following questions and take a look at the risks that come from loot boxes for the esports industry. What are loot boxes and where can we find them? What is the current issue in terms of gambling, and what impact can regulation have on esports? So what are loot boxes? We have no legal definition for loot boxes so far. Legally, you buy a right to use for the content of the loot box from the publisher. This means that a loot box is also a virtual game content that can be acquired for an additional fee in a video game. However, what makes loot boxes differ from conventional microtransactions is the fact that the exact content is not known to the purchaser in advance. This is why loot boxes are often compared to panini pictures, baseball cards, trading card games, or the famous Kinder eggs. And where can we find these loot boxes? There are many popular esport titles with loot boxes in it. For example, in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, you get boxes simply by playing the game. From time to time, you grab them at the end of a game. They also contain cosmetic items, the so-called skins, that have no effect on the gameplay. However, to open these boxes, you have to buy a key for real money. Overwatch 2, which was released as a free-to-play title, does not use loot boxes anymore, which is different from the first Overwatch game. And instead, it offers new cosmetic items through a battle pass system. And one of the most controversial cases with loot boxes is surely EA and FIFA since the release of FIFA 09. In the Ultimate Team mode, players can form their own teams by collecting cards of soccer players, which have been offered through virtual card packs that can be purchased with in-game currency or real-world funds. EA has decided not to disclose the mode's profit figures in 2022's annual report, but the report for 2021 states $1.6 billion of revenue, which makes 29% of EA's business sales for this year. As we learned from FIFA, it's all about the money. According to Juniper Research, 230 million or 5% of all gamers will turn to loot boxes by 2025. If 230 million people generate a revenue of $20 billion in sales, each buyer pays an average of $87, more than for a full-price game. So loot box games are revenue drivers and named as such for investors. These revenue increases also benefit esports. There is more money with the publishers that can be used, for example, for hosting tournaments and prize money. So let's just jump straight into the core of today's talk, the gambling debate and the impact of the esports sector. The question of whether loot boxes are gambling can have multiple implications for esports. Even it is currently mostly an openly discussed question and only a few binding regulations have been created, the risk of stricter regulation exists at any time. Time and time again, various media reports tell of cases in which players have spent huge sums of money far beyond their means. Loot boxes are therefore viewed critically by many players because the design of the offers often tempts them to spend large sums of money uncontrollably without providing safeguards for particularly vulnerable players. Therefore, first countries indicate that loot boxes fall under the definition of gambling in their legal systems and have to be regulated accordingly. Many of us probably have noticed Electronic Arts had trouble in the Netherlands and Belgium recently. In 2018, the Belgian Gaming Commission had classified the loot boxes in some titles, including FIFA in particular, as illegal gambling. As a result, numerous game companies decided to remove their loot boxes from their titles to be on the safe side. Likewise, the Dutch Gaming Authority classified the loot boxes in EA's FIFA as illegal online gambling as well. At least in the Netherlands, EA has been lucky. The Dutch Supreme Court ruled last year that loot boxes should not be gambling. According to the judges, the distribution of the loot boxes is not an isolated game. Another main argument is that there is no monetary value in the secondary market for loot box content. Aside from that case, there have been no other major rulings so far also for other games. Nevertheless, it will be interesting to observe potential new cases against the background of the recent rulings of the European Court of Justice on player protection at online casinos. Let's go into a little bit more detail and check out the German legal regulations. Germany has a state monopoly on gambling, the so-called Glücksspielstaatsvertrag, which was reformed in the summer of 2021. The offering of gambling is prohibited in Germany and requires official authorization. In addition, the Glücksspielstaatsvertrag prohibits the organization of gambling on the internet as a whole and allows only a few exceptions. Moreover, the offering of gambling without the necessary permission is a crime in Germany and can be persecuted. So when we look at the definition, what is gambling pursuant to the Glücksspielstaatsvertrag? Gambling is present if within the framework of a game, a fee is charged for the acquisition of a chance to win, and the decision on the win depends entirely or predominantly on random chance. So basically, we only have 4 criteria that have to be fulfilled. We need a game, a fee has to be paid, a chance to win, and the win must be on random chance. So therefore, it depends on the specific design of the loot box system in games whether it can fall under the definition of gambling. The main counter-arguments of publishers and others are: you have no chance for a total loss when you buy a loot box because you always get some items out of it, and that there is no value for resale on the secondary market. When we compare loot boxes to classic gambling, it is also very interesting why players buy loot boxes at all. According to a study from the UK, purchasing loot boxes is driven by a multitude of overlapping motivations. The study conducted a series of interviews with a diverse sample of regular loot box purchases from across the UK. Motivations include both social interactions and game-related motivations. Participants also purchased loot boxes because of a fear of missing out, the so-called FOMO, either socially, financially, or acquisitively, on items that are only available for a limited time. Players are often nudged towards purchasing with a number of well-known psychological techniques, such as the endowment effect by giving away free loot boxes but then charging for opening, like the Counter-Strike Go boxes, special limited time offers or items, and obfuscation of costs, for example with in-game currencies. All these factors are especially significant in the case of young people, so therefore the protection of minors must always be considered when it comes to the topic of loot boxes. In Germany, we have the so-called Unterhaltungssoftware Selbstkontrolle, in short USK. The USK is the organization responsible for the age rating of video games and video game trailers in Germany. There is no duty to have one's game tested by the USK, but due to the Youth Protection Act, every game must carry an age rating. Before a game has not been reviewed by the USK, an age rating of 18 years or older applies and the game can be indexed. From 2023, new testing criteria will apply for the age rating of video games of the USK. This may affect the availability and presentation of games at all. The new review criteria may also affect how in-game purchases are presented in games. Developers and publishers are often interested in obtaining the lowest possible age rating. This would also be an advantage for esports titles. With the expanded criteria, it is now possible for developers to make special reference to in-game purchases or to make access more difficult in order to positively influence the age rating. And according to the new German Youth Protection Act, loot boxes are considered a so-called interaction risk, which is to be addressed primarily with descriptors on the package of the game. The increased age rating due to loot boxes remains an emergency option, says the USK. They write that higher ratings can only be given in individual cases if the additional information and warning labels are not sufficient due to a significantly increased risk. In the case of FIFA 2023, for example, the USK has explicitly clarified that it does not see gambling in this game. So the question arises, can there be a difference concerning youth protection between the game as such and streaming of the game? Nevertheless, most computer games considered as esports titles are merely developmentally harmful for certain age groups and therefore have a higher age rating USK label. This specifies bindingly for which age groups the respective game is suitable or unsuitable. These approvals must be observed when making the game themselves available, regardless of whether this is done online or offline. Professional as well as amateur players must have reached the age appropriate to the game. The organizer of eSport tournament is responsible for compliance with these age limits. This is in line with the German Youth Protection Act, which makes playing games on publicly displayed electronic screen gaming devices dependent on compliance with these age ratings. Now the question arises whether the age rating of the game played necessarily applies to the live streams and recordings at the same time. In other words, whether the provider of such streams and recordings may also address an audience that is younger than the age rating of the title shown allows. There are good reasons to say so. For one thing, the viewer lacks the direct opportunity to influence an act that is open to the player. In computer games, interactivity leads to a changed effect on the player, who is drawn into the action and forced to make decisions under pressure to act. This is not the case when watching an esports event. At most, the stream viewer can participate, possibly with the chat window, otherwise the viewer remains passive. So the direct effect on the player against which the age rating is measured with regard to the game is missing. Moreover, the transmission of the game action due to the commentary by the moderators must be evaluated separately. Admittedly, the reason for watching esports event is likely to be less the commentary and much more the game performance of the esport athletes. However, the commentary can support this perception if it precisely does not point out the game content, but rather highlights tactics, skills, and success of individual athletes or teams. In this respect, the commentary is quite suitable for conveying the effect of the game broadcast as a sporting event. So the reporting privilege could apply to live broadcasts, at least for larger tournaments with considerable coverage. So the provider would not have to take any special precautions to exclude younger viewers. However, requirement for this is that the broadcast or summary with commentary can also be understood as a news broadcast, which may be questionable in the case of smaller tournaments, and consequently, the uploading of streams to YouTube or similar sites for an unlimited period of time is unlikely to be justified by the reporting privilege alone, as the required reference to current events will regularly no longer apply. Now let's take a quick look at what concrete risks a classification of loot boxes as gambling could bring with it for the entire esports sector. Streaming of esport events can become more difficult. We all know Twitch has banned streaming slots, roulette or dice games that are not licensed in the US or other jurisdictions in the last October. So we have the possibility that some games only are allowed for adults and we have streams only for 18+. Moreover, the sponsoring of esports events can be in danger. It could be hard to find sponsors who do not refuse gambling. The sponsor's brand safety is at risk here. Due to the current lack of legal definitions, there is a high degree of uncertainty regarding sanctions for tournament organizers or sponsors. The marketing of the broadcasting rights may be difficult too. Rights can become less attractive as broadcasting is only permitted, for example, at restricted broadcasting times that comply with the protection of minors. Also in the context of broadcastings, we can see a loss of potential advertising partners and a decline of the revenues. And further aspects are that we can get far-reaching advertising restrictions if loot boxes qualify as gambling under criminal or regulatory law. There is an advertising ban in the Glücksspielstaatsvertrag, so that advertising directed at minors is not permitted. Finally, the validity of purchase contracts may also be questionable in case of purchases by adults. The decisive factor is whether the purchase of loot boxes is illegal gambling, so the purchase is void. And this has the consequence that customers could demand the return of the purchase price they paid. So we already reached our 15-minute mark. Here we have our final conclusion on the loot box issue. Loot boxes are a comparatively new legal phenomenon, which only we have a few explicit legal frameworks yet. Regulation is expected to increase in the coming months and years with partial risks for the esports industry. And many of the legal questions addressed remain open to divergent evaluation decisions. At many points, difficult problems may arise with regard to the burden of proof, which may hinder enforcement of the law and reduce the motivation for judicial clarification of the issue raised.